Hey, today we're back to basics with dollar store blasters. Let's go.
Hey, it's been a while. I've been working on my film. I think I'm just gonna go in the dollar store. I just drove by. Let's make a blaster, maybe? I don't know. I never know what's in there, so let's go find something. Bring home the loot. Make a blaster, I think. Yeah, let's go. Got my loot. Maybe $4 or $5. Let's go make a blaster.
All right, and let's get to making. I mean, I made enough of these. I kind of have a rough idea, but for me, the big aha moment was the using those dollar store saws that you would never saw wood with, but as a handle, right? Because the handle on those guns, no matter what configuration I put them in, it looks like a gun, contemporary gun. It's just gun, and then the handles are always kind of made for children, so they look a little weird. But that saw blade handle is futuristic. It's ergonomic for the actor or the cosplayer, and it's just a really nice solution. And it's that thing where you put two things together that haven't been put together before, and you get something else. It really works for that. So I'm a big advocate of the saw blade. So here I'm taking these apart, and I want to put them next to each other, and I realize that they won't be bifurcated. They'll be both going the same way, if that makes sense, right? Because they're not meant to be one on top of the other. The little latch there is like on the left on both of them. So I took off the snout because I want to flip the one around, so those are bifurcated. It's the word of the day, bifurcated. And here, I'm just... You got to be careful with this, but using the Dremel tool to cut these apart is a lot easier and cleaner than with a hacksaw. And it's never surgically clean, but it's always clean enough. So here, what I'm doing here, like these videos I always find deceptive because it looks like I'm just, following a plan. But really what I'm doing, you can't see my face, but I'm realizing, if I go like this, that's the way it fits. And it just kind of, the piece will dictate to you what makes sense and what doesn't. And then here, game time decision, I'm like, nope, that's not it. And then I'm like, aha. So again, you can't see my face, but this is me going, aha. And then it's going to give me a nicer base for the handle. So here, this is just the poor man's, sanding table. It's just a belt sander. If you're going to do this, be very careful, but it's just very effective, right? I want to get everything smooth and everything flat. And this machine is going to do that a lot better than if I do it by hand. Doing it by hand is fine. And here I'm, fine-tuning it with the emery sticks, sanding sticks. I have sort of like a whole collection of store-bought sanding sticks and dollar store nail files and, whatever gets the job done. So here's the 5-minute epoxy. I like buying this 5-minute epoxy from the hobby store because it's like I can always have it on hand, as opposed to like when you get those like syringe style ones from the box store. So here I'm just using 5-minute epoxy on this because I want it to really grab, right? As opposed to, super glue sometimes in these situations will not grab. Always clamp things together when you glue it. Like this, I actually picked up not from prop building, but I watch a lot of luthiers, a lot of guitar building guys. And every time they glue something, it's like how many ever clamps they can fit on that. That's how many clips they use, clamps. So I've kind of adopted that into my practice where when you're gluing something, just as many clamps as you can fit on there, you're going to have a better result. All right, so now I'm figuring out how to put this handle on there. And then I realized I have this other gun that I thought was a throwaway gun, but now I'm like, because I put the two guns together the way I finally did, there's sort of like a flat surface at the top, right? Like a barren area. So I'm like, let me put this scope on here. Now, because it's tiny, this scope, in my sort of storytelling that I'm telling myself about what does this do on this gun. So in my design, right? I'm using air quotes. That's a laser sight, right? So the gun now is a laser sight. So now I'm just going to take some 150, some heavy grit paper, and just going to tooth it up, as we say. And all you're doing here is you want to scuff up both pieces that you're gluing together so that there's little nooks and crannies. I mean, I'm sure there's a more technical term for that, but so there's just little nooks and crannies for the glue to seep into and lock everything into place, right? So now the connection of a flat surface to a flat surface is just never a great thing, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm just using these screws because I have them on hand. You could use dowels, you could use wire, you could use a piece of coat hanger, whatever, just so that there's more of a mechanical type connection to the piece, right? So it's going to be flat surface to flat surface, but now with these little nubs that I'm going to epoxy in there, it's a much more secure bond. And here, like I said, just because I had these wood screws on hand, I'm just taking off the nubs. And because this is going to be glued and I kind of want it to be rough and rugged, I just file it a little bit. And now, and the reason that I made the gun this way is you know, as I move on and start to glue things on, it's like that handle fits very nicely in this sort of arrangement of all our parts, right? So that to me is always a sign of like, okay. So here you'll see, right? So if I was just gluing the flat surface of the gun to the flat surface of the top of the handle, that's just asking for trouble that it's going to snap off. So by just putting those two little nubs in there, like I said, I just used screws that I had on hand. You could use dowels, wire, whatever, pieces of plastic. And then here I'm just using my little mat cutter to make sure that that's centered as best as I can have it. And again, you know, that was glued down with a clamp, much better. So now I'm just sort of toothing it up. And if this looks out of place to you, it's because it is. The videos got mixed up, but I'll take this as an opportunity to reiterate. What we're doing is we're putting the epoxy on there. We got it all nubbed up. A little dap, dap, dap. Gonna put it on there. And I think in that past moment, what I was doing was doing a trial run, which I picked up from the guitar guys. So, I don't know. I'm learning something new here. But you get the idea. I'm gluing a thing to a thing, and I want it to stick, so I'm toothing it up and clamping it down. So now we got something. So I got those two screws. I know I'm going to be using Bondo, but then I was like, oh, maybe this is an opportunity to just add a little greebly, right? So these are the Evil Ted trays. Evil Ted, great maker on YouTube. And he has these trays, I think I bought them at Michael's, where it's like whenever I'm casting something in resin, there's always a little bit left over. So I'll pour it into these trays, and then I just have a box of these greeblies that are just really great, especially for these situations. So here, because again, we're putting two things together that aren't supposed to be put together, it was just a little too wide. So I busted out my poor man's table sander again, and then there I just trimmed down the sides. And then now this is going to be a better solution, right? Because you have that whole face of the gun handle or the saw blade, and I could have just filled it and sanded it smooth, but now adding this little greebly, this little detail, it just adds production value to the piece, just makes it more interesting. So here what am I doing? Pop quiz. That's right, toothing it up. So I like to just take a needle file and just make little cat scratches, little cat scratch fever. And that's all that happens is glue goes in there, and then it's all sort of mishmashed on the other piece, and glue will go in there, and it's just going to help to bond everything together. And again, I'm using 5-minute epoxy because I just feel like with these kind of plastics, injection molding stuff, if you're just going super gluing stuff together, flat surfaces, it's just, I don't know. I've had it be fine, and I've had it come flying off. So for me with the epoxy, it's just kind of like making it bulletproof. Pardon the pun, not intended. So here, And again, I always tend to just sort of go with it. So those were floating around, and off camera, I struggled to get those positioned just right. But, sometimes you struggle. So now some just good old Bondo. I got, because this is a cheap dollar toy, there's always lots of screw holes, right? Where there's just holes in the plastic where screws are. You want to get rid of those. And then oftentimes when I'm sort of merging together two pieces that aren't meant to be merged together, you get a lot of gaps, or maybe there's just like a couple millimeters that are a little weird. And the Bondo is just a great way to sort of sculpt plastic, and you always got to be careful with the kicker. You could do too much, and then it's, it gets all firmed up before you can finish what you're set out to do. And then if you do too little, it'll never harden. But it is the perfect sort of solution for this. So what I've evolved to doing over the years is, because it's always like against the clock, if you saw there, I used my fingers. And I used to use like a pastry cone, and I used to use like a little knife. And I just found that it just stresses me out, like I got to get this done before it hardens, that I found that it's just easier to use my finger. Probably not the best way, but that's the way that works for me. Find a way that works for you, and then just own it. And then when it's at this almost hard state, that's when you can kind of take your knife, or your palette knife or whatever, and just start to trim off all the excess so you don't have to sand that off. So now I got a whole array of sanding sticks and sanding paper and files, because, you look at that is not fun to sand, right? There's not... The edges of that saw blade handle are like the only flat surfaces on this, right? So it's like files to get into the corner. Then I have different grit little like emery boards, and different size little emery boards. And it's just basically you just work your way around it, and whatever gets the job done. My palm sander is my go-to sander that I love, but with this, too many rounded edges, right? So there it's like, oh, that's a little high. There's a lot of Bondo. Let me use this cheap dollar store nail file that is really gritty just to get it down. Then once I get it down, I use these fine grit sanding sticks. It's a process. And then, I don't know, here I am 10 days later and it's done. Just deal with it. Sanding needles, I was at the hobby store the other day picking up primer, I think, and I saw those at the counter. I said, let me give these a shot, and they weren't. I think they're probably great for model building, but not so great for Bondo. They're just a little too flexible for that. But then, I got the good old-fashioned sanding sticks. They look like coffee stirrers. Those work great. And then once I start getting into the 220, that's like, okay, getting ready to bring it home. And usually I never feel like I'm finished sanding. I feel like you could just sand and sand and sand. So it's like at a certain point, you abandon it. You say, okay, I did that. And then what'll happen is you'll start to prep for paint, and you'll be like, oh, dang, missed that spot. Got to get that. So just do my best, right? So there's 500 grit, and that's sort of like the final pass. And you see here within this process, it's all, diligently trying to get every single spot, right? So it's like at a certain point, you just have to say, okay, well, I did my best, right? So here, the 500 is sort of, for me, the last pass. Here I have my shop vac, just because it's, again, so dusty and so like rounded and weird angles that I'm just sucking out dust, blowing out dust. And then finally, before I paint, little isopropyl alcohol. And the reason we love isopropyl alcohol is just because you can really give something a bath and it evaporates, within a couple minutes you could paint, as opposed to like, if you did this with water, you'd probably have to, I probably would let it set for a day before I went ahead and painted it. And then, use the hair dryer to speed things up. Sometimes I use the heat gun, but that's a little too hot. But the hair dryer is a great tool. So here's a primer. First coat is a primer. That's self-explanatory. And why I always like to use gray primer on the very first coat is so then you can see like all the voids. When I used to paint houses, the holidays, right? It's all that stuff I have to fix. So I have the spot putty. And again, right, like all that sanding and really taking my time to sanding, and you still miss all these spots. And again, like I said with the Bondo, I used to use like a knife for this, and I don't know, I just got in the habit of just putting on, because I always have these days you always have the rubber gloves or the nitrate gloves on hand. So I was like, you know what, just use my finger. And the reason, again, why I use the finger is, in my case, for whatever my deal is, it's just easier for me to move quickly and accurately with my finger. I would prefer that I used a knife, but that's not my situation. And then now, the trick here with this is using the fine sandpaper, and then you just want to sand off everything but the little void that it covered, right? And that can be a little bit of a hat trick sometimes, because sometimes you'll just sand off the whole thing. Or you'll sand off the whole thing and the void is so minuscule that it'll look like you sanded it off, but you didn't. But that's like how accurate the stuff is. And then once you put your final color on there, you'll be glad you did that. And again, another pass with the shop vac. I blow it out, suck it in, and then now I hit it with a gloss black, and this is going to be my base coat, right? So I'm going to paint it chrome, and black is always a good base for chrome, but also I want to have little details that I want to be black, right? Like, so those little, I don't know what they are, those like little muzzle things around the shroud, I want to keep those black. In that saw blade handle, there's that nice little sort of detail of, I don't know what they are, they're just like those lines you'll see there in a second. So I definitely want to put some masking tape over those lines. And this yellow tape is the Tamiya masking tape. It's a little expensive, but it's one of those things where, you know, I don't use a lot of it, but when I do use it, it's so superior to trying to, like if you were trying to do that with like some hardware store blue tape, would not be good. And lots of times you pull off the paint, right? So this Tamiya stuff is the bomb. So here I'm just going to hit, you know, just a hardware store silver, because I know I'm going to really dirty this up. And if you want the chrome look, you know, you stop there. But for me, I'm going to really dinge it up. But I want this to be my base coat, as if, you know, this thing was passed down maybe 3 generations. So it was at one point beautiful silver, but now it's just a dingy, very effective weapon, right? And so the secret to getting those nice crisp lines, unfortunately, is you just got to let your paint dry, right? So that base coat, you got to let it dry 24 hours. Once you start speeding that up and getting impatient with that, it's fine, but your masking tape is going to peel off the tape. It just does, right? So if it's really important to you to have a masking job, just, you know, bite the bullet and wait 24 hours. So here's my water-based oil paints, which I find to be the best for weathering. We just got, you know, if you see my channel, I do this all the time. I got the blacks, got the burnt umber, got the burnt sienna. And I just put a whole wash on here, just slather it on, right? And I found the most effective way to do this is you don't have a plan, right? Like if you start thinking, oh, a little more here, it's like, it doesn't look as good. It's just like I put a lot on, I take a lot off. Put a lot on, take a lot off. Oh, what happened there? That's a happy accident. Keep that. And it's basically just setting myself up to have as many happy accidents as possible, appreciating when they do, and then just moving on when they don't, right? So that already looks better to me. Might not to you. You might like it shiny. So here with the burnt umber, I try to just go very gentle with that because I like it to look like rust. And then here you see I'm just adding all these different Easter egg colors, which is weird, but it's not. I've been doing this for a while. So what I like to do with these is like, I'm just patting these on. I'm going to take off like 99% of this, right? It's like, I've just found that just these little flecks of color, because all my props are for films, right? Not necessarily like cosplay or for the shelf. It's like there's something that happens when you're color correcting or when you're lighting with these little flecks where it's just little points of interest. Very tiny, like grains of sand almost. And then here is, you know, if you follow my channel, I'm all about the bloody hand. So what I always do is put a blood on the hand, and it's like the soldier, like the brave man or woman. It's like they were such an epic battle that their hands were bleeding and they fought on. And again, 99% of that will be gone, but just that little fleck makes me happy. So here is the Rub and Buff, the silver metallic wax. And all this does is it pulls back up some of the highlights, right? Because I have what I have like a clear coat on here, like a matte clear, a wash of black and brown, and you know, all this stuff. So the wax just brings up the highlights. And then here I have this blue, which I only have this because I was at a hobby store and I was like, oh, I've never seen this before, so I bought it. So what I like to use this for is whenever I have a gun barrel, like, you know how you get the blue on the end of something that has extreme heat, and I typically would do this with like a translucent or like an anodized blue. I've been doing it lately with this wax, and that looks pretty good, right? It's pretty effective. So I'm still on the fence of which technique I use. I think here maybe I go a little too far, but it's fine. It is what it is, right? We're just going with it. So now the nicotine spray. I love the nicotine spray. So this is just water-based, very thin, and sometimes like I'll just spray it, like overspray it, because this is the one paint that looks good when it runs. I don't know why, but it does. So here I use the hair dryer, and this dries really quick too. But what's cool about this is it's water-based, right? So what you do is, oh, I forgot about this. So the rotten stone. So I'm really grunging this up, right? 3 generations of grunge, but it's such an effective weapon. It gets passed on and kept alive. So here, same thing with the weathering. It's like, so now I have that thin coat of nicotine on there, and it's water-based. So I'm just rubbing it off. I'm not really thinking about like, oh, this would look good, or oh, this spot here. It's just rubbing it off, right? Running roughshod over this. And the idea is sort of like, I don't know, the soldier gets home and they got to clean up their weapon real quick, and yeah, and then just drying it with the hair dryer. And I'm thinking, yeah, I think that's it. Like, tap out, it's done. Beauty shots. And then there you see what I was talking about. Like, so that blue, look how hot it is, like in this film look that I put this in right here. It's like you never know what's gonna pop, or you do if you get better at predicting those sorts of things. But that even looks like a spaceship. So yeah, this was a cool one, right? It's like you never know what's gonna happen. I'm very happy with the way this turned out. And it's worth noting that whenever I make something just for fun, just not for a specific project, they always seem to come out better, right? Because there's no pressure, there's no expectation. So it's important to just keep making this stuff, right? It's like, I maybe will use this for a project in the future, or in a project in the future, I'll have an idea, and because I've already gone through the process with this build, I'll make a better version for that project that matters, right? That'll be out there. But yeah. And again, you know, it's like I make enough of these, and I had a specific thing in my head where I was like, okay, I'm gonna put these 2 barrels this way. I just love the saw blades, right? And again, that was a dollar store thing that I just kind of found, but it's like, rather than just a traditional gun trigger, just that little thing of putting the saw blade type handle changes it entirely. It makes it unique and brings a lot of value to the production. But what I was saying is, like, so the idea I had in my mind about how I was gonna put these 2 together, once it was in front of me, it made more sense to do it this way. And it really just came out good, I don't mind saying. So I guess the only thing left to do now is to fire it up. All right. Let's make a little room here. Let's see what we got. I never know how these things turn on. I'm gonna say on the on this one. It's this. Okay. Let's put the double barrel action. Well, as always, I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. Love to read the comments. And be sure to check out the merch shop. We got the hats, we got the shirts. Buying that really helps the channel. I got Film Quest. I was just at Film Quest. Got the hat from them. Like I said, I like to practice what I preach. Buying merch really helps smaller entities. And it's just fun to wear a hat that nobody else has. Well, just remember, I am just here to help make sci-fi.